Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, January 31st, 2018 meeting of the Long Meadow School Committee. I call the meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded and aired live by LCTV as well as being live streamed on longmeadow.org. It is a legal requirement for anyone else to disclose if they are recording this meeting. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. And for correspondence.
A letter dated for Mr. Jeffrey Klutz,
Klutz, yeah.
dated January 23, 2018, regarding the Long Meadow Public School policy on school zoning when parents have equal joint custody of their children. Another email from Ms. Jen Falcone received on January 25, 2018, with her statement made at the January 24th school committee attached. And lastly, an email from Ms. Erin Horniak received on January 25, 2018, with the results of the 2017 boys soccer survey results.
Okay, great, thank you. And we do not have any minutes for approval tonight, so we'll move on to visitor comments. Seeing none, we'll move on to school committee announcements and recognition. Moving right along to business with guests. We have the presentation of the FY 2019 school budget.
All right, so last week we had an opportunity to bring to the committee a recommendation for the 18-19 school year, FY 19. And tonight is our public budget hearing, which is required by law. And so this is another opportunity for the committee to review the recommendation and perhaps get some clarification as we look forward to ultimately a voted budget on February 14th, is it? 14th. So tonight, I wanted to again thank our administrative team for coming out, and they're here in case there are questions that you have or anything that needs any additional clarification. And I think it's also, as this first slide suggests, hopefully an indication that we bring this to you as a team, and it's reflective of a lot of planning. It's reflective of a lot of administrative dialogue. It's reflective of our commitment to some specific goals. Certainly, the budget is an important way that we commit to the tradition of educational excellence here in Long Meadow. We have some proposed district improvement plan goals that have guided many of our decisions as they relate to social emotional learning, differentiation of curriculum and instructional practice, and curriculum alignment, meaning our efforts to ensure that we are coordinated and aligned across grades and across schools. We want to present a budget that is cost-effective and sustainable into the future. Class size has always been an important consideration jointly of our administrative team and the school committee. And certainly, many of the recommendations are shaped by our contractual obligations to district employees. And we hope you see that this is in fact also responsive to changing enrollment patterns, changing student needs, and we will, as the budget becomes clearer, we'll certainly make every effort to communicate it clearly to the community. Briefly, we took a peek at this last week. It's worth looking at it again. We often think of the return on investment that education provides, and here in Long Meadow, certainly there's plenty of indicators that demonstrate the success of our students and, frankly, the distance between our students and their peers in Massachusetts and across the country. Obviously, these aren't the only indicators of our success or student success. We look at a range of indicators, including the social, emotional health, the developmental needs of students. But when we see that Long Meadow High students score 88.5% of Long Meadow High students achieve scores of 3 or higher on AP exams. When you see that in comparison to state results or national results, you get a sense of the excellence that we are able to offer students here in Long Meadow. What I'm not showing you is simply the number of students, the number of test takers, and the number of tests that we offer in AP areas. And so that's an important indicator of our success. And as I said last week, you don't achieve excellence in AP programming without strong programming at the elementary and middle level. It's a scaffold that builds up towards those AP results. This slide, once again, summarizes the recommendation. You'll see that the general fund allocation that is projected in this recommendation would have an increase of $674,257 over FY18. Special revenue, referring to federal and state grants and other accounts, we're projecting that those revenue sources would decrease. And the net result would be that the sort of the net increase on the FY19 budget that is being proposed would be a $254,555 increase over FY18. So a fairly modest increase in the overall budget and an increase to the general fund of $674,257. So as you know, the detailed budget backup is in your packet. I want to thank Mr. Mazza for preparing that and his diligence and making sure that you have all the specific line item information that is kind of rolled up into tonight's presentation. When we look at the funding sources that we just discussed, you'll see that we are heavily dependent on the general fund, but there are also some important sources of revenue relating to circuit breaker, Medco, school choice, and some regular and special education grants. At the highest level, when you look at our allocations, you'll see that we are sort of dependent on the great work of our staff and our teachers, and really when you get into some of the discretionary areas relating to supplies and materials, it's sort of a modest chunk of the overall budget, and that's true annually. Kind of tracking the general fund increase that we're projecting in FY19 as it compares to increases in recent years, you'll see that it sort of stands somewhere in the middle, I'd say, of what are typical general fund increases. We are, again, anticipating, I'd say, a significant decrease from special revenues that we could talk more about. So this slide captures, in broad strokes, the changes that we anticipate or are projecting. On the left side, I would describe the areas that I've highlighted in blue. I think I'd describe these as sort of necessary reductions, reductions that don't necessarily result in a loss of services to students. These are reductions that are tied to specific student needs, and so as those needs change, then obviously the expenditures associated with those needs change. So those are reductions that are necessary, and we couldn't commit funds in those areas, if we wanted to, frankly. The out-of-district tuitions, the out-of-district placements simply aren't there. And so so there's a kind of a correspondence between the reductions you see on the left and the investments that we're making on the right. And so kind of one of the overall, the sort of the story that this budget tells is that we are proposing a budget that we believe will strengthen our capacity to educate children in their neighborhood schools. This will be a budget that would allow us to better service here in district students diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. We think that with the investments that we would make in special education services, that we'll be able to reduce high caseloads, that we'll be in a position to ensure that Special education teachers are more specialized at particular grade levels. The biggest investment on the right side there relates to the 3 elementary special education teachers that we're recommending. And again, we think that this investment is kind of a critical component of our efforts to be more inclusive, to address the needs of the whole child, and that's something that has been important to us collaboratively here with the school committee and our administrative team together. So I highlighted the blue and the green to sort of draw your attention to the correspondence between those. I'll note, again, on the left side, the reductions associated with enrollment that we are projecting at Williams and Center School. We can share some additional, I think the committee had asked for some additional information on class size, so we can bring that up and talk about that as well. Attrition reduction that relates to the reductions that we'd experience as employees who are higher on the pay scale move on to better things such as retirement, and new employees come in lower on the pay scale. So that attrition number is a factor as well. And then there's some other miscellaneous reductions there as well. On the addition side, I think there are some strategic investments that we will be able to make, and I think we've talked collaboratively with the school committee. Our administrative team has talked about some important investments that we think we should make in the high school athletic program. And so that $30,000 investment will allow us to close some of the annual gaps that we've seen in the athletic program. And I think we all recognize sort of the bang for your buck that you get when you invest in extracurriculars, including athletics. Consumable supplies, we have talked, I think the administrative team shares the committee's interest and concern in kind of putting forth reasonable fee or reasonable requests to parents when we ask for school supplies. And so with this budget, we think that we should make a recommendation to invest in this area to ensure that we're not asking parents for supplies that frankly ought to be provided by the district. Elementary summer clerical support. This is a modest investment that I think would help our administrative team here. They spend some valuable time in the summer opening mail and trying to register students, and that work is better handled by our clerical staff that's better equipped and better trained to do that. And so that would require some negotiated agreements, but we think that will also support parents who often call in the summer and are trying to make contact with their child's school, and I think it'll enhance that connection. So that's a sort of a summary of the reductions and additions that we are projecting for the FY19 budget. I sort of didn't address in the top right, the contractual obligations. That's obviously the single largest addition that we're projecting for FY19, and this would be to address any salary adjustments as people move vertically or horizontally on our salary schedule. It would also be in a position to help us with cost of living adjustments. So again, this is some of the rationale behind the investments that we hope to make in FY19. We talked about that. The enrollment, this is a current snapshot. I'll give you a sense of the numbers of students that are moving through the K-12 pipeline. And it's important, obviously, for your planning and for the budget decisions that are before you. Blueberry Hill, classroom projections, section size estimates, and you'll see that we're anticipating that we'll come back with the same number of sections next year at Blueberry Hill as we have this year. Center, we're anticipating a reduction of 1 section as that fifth grade class with 4 sections moves out. It will be replaced by a kindergarten section, most likely with kindergarten class with 3 sections. So a net reduction of a single section at center school. Wolf Swamp appears to be status quo, that we will have 3 sections neatly in each grade level. And then this is the sort of the average class size that we are expecting at Glenbrook and Williams, and we provided you with some more detailed information in your packet. I could pull it up on the board if you want, or I can keep going at your, whatever works for you. Would you like me to pull up that document, or?
I'm okay looking at the information in the packet. Does anyone else want to see it up on the screen?
Didn't it differ, some of the numbers? From
So these are the averages, and yeah, there's, so the detail that, that you requested, I think shows probably a clearer picture. So let me see if I can pull that up for you. And for anybody that might be watching at home, might be helpful. So let me just enlarge this. So this is Glenbrook. You'll notice the blue is 17-18, and the sort of mustard color there is 18-19. And then additionally, you'll see Williams, again, the blue is 17-18, and the mustard color is 18-19. I don't know if you want me to pause there, or we can come back to that during your discussion. Easily can come back, yeah. Just bring back up the presentation. And again, back to the slide where we started, that just shows the FY19 budget summarized, the recommended summary, and then sort of where we left off, or where you left off at your last meeting, was to sort of think about any potential adjustments to the recommendation. Sort of on the one side is sort of an approach that might recognize or respond to some of the fiscal concerns that have been expressed at the joint meeting that you had with the select board, and some correspondence you received from the finance committee. And on the right side is some potential additional investments. I know that we thought it was a good idea to make sure that we all recognize that there are things that we've discussed as an administrative team that aren't necessarily reflected here, so we wanted to kind of lay that out for you with some numbers attached. So that's where we are. We stand ready to answer any questions you might have. I know you had a crack at this last week, and you had a great discussion on some of the steps forward, but if any other questions have arisen in the meantime, we're happy to answer.
Stephanie?
Is there any investment in co-teaching at the elementary school? I know we've spoken about it. Co-teaching's mentioned in the district improvement plan. And part of the investment, we talked about math coaches, but was there any investment put in co-teaching at the elementary?
So the investments that, I'd love to have any of the principals take a crack at this as well, or Jean Fontaine, our Director of Pupil Services. The investments that we're making in additional elementary special education teachers, we think will put us in a position to increase our co-teaching efforts. It'll sort of put us on that path. There's a lot of, certainly a lot of training and a lot of planning that goes into that, but we think that this will put us in a position to meet that district improvement plan goal. So I don't know if that
Jess?
Just for a point of clarification for tonight's meeting, this is officially our public hearing on the budget. So forgive me if you said this already, Marty. But this is the night when we really want to encourage anybody, we don't have a whole lot of guests, but anybody who has any questions to come up and ask questions. We had an opportunity last week to really go through the budget and ask a lot of detailed questions, and we spent a lot of time doing that at our meeting last week. I'm primarily speaking to people at home now, not the people in this room who are here for the meeting, but again, this is our public hearing, so it would be great if anyone has any questions. That would be our priority also, is to hear.
Jess, I just haven't
from you.
opened it up yet to the, I
Okay.
haven't done that yet.
Oh, okay,
I'm
okay.
just going to let the
Okay.
committee, if they had any questions first, ask them, and then we can go to the committee. Did that answer your question, Stephanie? Okay. Any other questions or comments from the committee before I open it up? Okay. Then we will open the public hearing on the FY19 budget. Is there anyone that would like to come up, ask questions, comments, feedback?
Diane, you had a question?
No pressure.
Braggy?
I thought you had your hand raised.
Okay, well, if there are no further comments or questions, then I can close the public hearing, and we can bring it right back to the committee for any other questions, feedback. For us, I can tell.
Yeah, so three options basically. So the middle of the road, potential additions, and the physical caution side. We also got some more information that the governor's budget looks better than we expected. That doesn't mean the final budget will be better than expected, but so I guess I'll just reiterate what I said last meeting, which is my concern is I think this year and last year were anomalies. I don't think the special ed side in particular is going to, I don't think the cost and the savings that we saw the last couple of years are going to happen going forward. So if that's the case, if we took out that money, it would really cause a situation where we're struggling this year to try and get anywhere close to what the town's presenting as a potential number for us. So the good thing is we do have it this year. My concern is if we go with the additions, I think those are things that we'd add for 1 year and then have to cut them next year, the following year. But I also think looking at the town's overall, what we're looking at as a town, 5 years from now, if we're sitting here trying to look at our budget and we've hit that $25 cap, then, it's around $1 million we'd have to cut. And I think if we're the first town to get there and we're by ourselves, I have some experience with this, but if you're by yourself trying to make a change on anything, it's very difficult. You really need we will need other towns to also be close to that number or at that number in order for us to have any chance, in my opinion, to make a change at the state level on the 2.5 cap, or the $25 per thousand cap. So I guess the reason I'm saying all that is I think we need to slow down our march towards that number so that we're not the only ones that hit that number by ourselves years ahead of everybody else. And I think the only way to do that is to start looking at, can we stay below 2.5% as a town each year going forward? It can't be just this year. You'd have to make, I think the committee and the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee would all have to be kind of on the same page that we can't always tax to the maximum, because if we get to that $25 by ourselves, I don't see the state saying, well, we're going to do something special just for Longmeadow. I don't think that's going to happen. We'll need towns like East Longmeadow and the other towns that are relatively close to that cap to be there with us saying, we all need this. We all need to change the cap. So that's my spiel for the night.
Anyone else?
Just a quick question, I guess, to Tom. So looking at the fiscal caution side, when it says an approximate reduction of 100,000, if we were to consider the town's levy limit, what kind of impact would that have on the town's budget, taking the 100,000? Like, what are we looking at? It feels like a small number to me, so I'm wondering how much of an impact that has.
Conversations with the town in regards to the 2.3 raising the levy 2.3% instead of the 2.5%. It's really only about 95,000 in total, with the school department's portion and the fact that our proposed, the middle of the road budget is above the number that was projected back in October when they were looking at a distribution of the funds. That's where the 100,000 comes from. So really, even though I agree with Russ's position, even not raising to the full 2.5%, although it's an effort in going in that direction, it's really it's a small dollar amount. We would need to have been doing this for 10 or 15 years to really add years to the schedule before we get to the 2.5%. But at least it's an effort, a good faith effort, showing, the awareness of the fact that it's approaching, and that we're doing everything we can.
Okay.
But it is a small number compared to the total budget, which is like $60 million when you put all the benefits, school, town costs together.
Okay, thank you.
Stephanie? I'm just gonna say that this budget frightens me in the future, because the only reason we're coming even close is because we have this anomaly of out-of-district tuition reduction. So it makes me want to err on the side of caution, because the laws of probability are, we're going to encounter some increased needs in the future in special ed. I don't know that there's ever been a reduction as big as this in one budget. So it frightens me to think of, if we didn't have this, where would we be and what cuts would we need to make? But just on a general, anytime we make cuts at the chalkboard, I'm concerned. And we have the class sizes at Williams and Glenbrook in particularly, based on what we were giving. Anytime I see a class size of 25, it's a red flag for me. Anytime you talk about instruction and improving education, I mean, time and time again, you're looking at class sizes and keeping those class sizes low. And these ranges are pretty high. We've got a range of 26 and 27 in a math class. So that is concerning to me when we're talking about potential additional investments. My concentration right now is, am I happy with what I see before me? And that's one thing that struck me, is I'm always concerned about class sizes and when we make teacher cuts. But then, this anomaly with the special ed reduction too, and how that's going to play out in the future definitely concerns me. That we have to keep that on our radar. But I don't know how everyone else felt about those class sizes. I know we talked about at one point, where is our threshold, in a class number. So if anyone has anything to say about that, I'd like to hear about it. But I think some of those are pretty high. I worry about.
I agree with your concerns, Stephanie, about the 26 and 27 in those math sections you're referring to at Glenbrook, correct?
Yep,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it is.
it's Glenbrook.
It's current.
Yeah, that's current.
algebra.
But projected for next year.
But next year we have 25, 26.
Right. Next year, it looks like the high for algebra and math is 8th grade is 26. And the problem there is, of course, if we add a third section, our classes are going to be very, very small.
That's why we need one building.
Right. But I do share your concerns. That's the reason I asked to speak. But I mean, adding another section at that very borderline number is tough to justify.
It's tough. I think we have had small classes. I think you have success with small classes. You risk it with bigger.
Especially in math, yeah.
Where do you want to take that
Yeah.
gamble? They're high, but and we're making cuts, so it's always something that.
And
I'm
looking
concerned
at some of the trends for our 8th grade math with testing in the background also of my head. Not a predominant factor in any decisions, but certainly in the back of our heads that.
I wanted to ask how it went, this year at Glenbrook with, I think we're sort of, in some places we're going down and in some places we're staying even in those math sections from this year to next year. Is there any feedback that you might have?
Yeah,
I know
would be, Nicole Allen, our principal, had another commitment. She couldn't make it tonight. I'd say I don't think I think it's been fairly consistent with historical numbers at Glenbrook. Is that fair? I mean, I'm looking to.
Yeah, I would say for the upper level math sections, they've been experiencing 25, 26, 27, I would say, for the last 2 or 3 years, although Principal Nelson is here and she was an assistant principal there a few years ago, so maybe she could add to that if she recalls.
Do you want me to go up?
Yeah, you want.
Sorry, Beth.
So the seventh one, which is the accelerated math in the 7th grade, and the algebra class in the 8th grade at Glenbrook have always historically, since the 14-15 school year, at least I can speak to, been in the range of 25 to 28. So those teachers have always had a larger course load.
Yeah.
And then the smaller class sizes are the 7-2 section and the pre-algebra and 8th grade section, which usually have class sizes more in the range of anywhere from 16 to about 19, 20, but they're often co-taught with a special education teacher as well. At least at Glenbrook.
And have you gotten any feedback from them on that class size and the algebra and some of the, that's when the kids are moving into the, I don't know, kind of the honors track, if they're picking up algebra there. Have they given you feedback on that
Typically,
size?
it
or
does
that
work
level?
well with the 7-1 and the algebra class. And the teachers, I think 2 years ago was the headline, thanks but no, Glenbrook says thanks but no thanks, because this was the conversation when the team was getting eliminated at Williams. And there was the discussion to have a traveling team go back and forth between Williams and Glenbrook, and it was going to be too much disruption. The teachers wanted to forego that shared team for the larger class size because they felt that it was in the better interest of the cohesiveness of the teams being able to talk about the students on a daily basis and meet in that team time, work with the special education educators, and not be traveling back and forth from one middle school to the next.
Yeah.
So I haven't been there in the past 2 years, but that was the conversation 2 years ago. And I think that many of the staff feel the same way.
I think if there was a threshold that you had, and you said that, we want to make sure that we're below this threshold, there's various ways that we could make sure that we meet that expectation. Whether it's, we've thought about using the math lab teachers as a way to reduce section size. Or you could go out and try to find a .2 teacher. There's different ways to approach that. But, adding a section, again, if there is a threshold that you have in mind, we definitely could put something together to meet that.
I feel like we're just, I know from my own preference, I think we're just dancing the line. I think we talked
Yeah.
about that last year, and
Yeah.
it was like, under, 25 or under, and then there was maybe one section that turned out to be 26 or something like that. So it looks like we're in the same position. And I don't know if there's any creative solutions that would be, that would work well, and be
And
helpful versus, more difficult.
Yeah, right. And also keeping in mind that these are projections. We don't know exactly how many students will wind up in that upper level algebra class at the 8th grade at Glenbrook. It's sort of dependent on signups and waivers and recommendations and that kind of thing. So I suspect that Principal Allen was erring on the side of, of showing you a larger number than trying to anticipate a smaller number. But, again, that's something that we could address, based on any recommendation that you have or direction that you have.
Peggy?
Oh, what happens if we could have high school students as teacher assistants?
That'd be really cool.
Yeah, and sometimes when you have those additional resources. It gives the teacher the flexibility to create some small group instruction, whether it be high school students or, our preference would probably be some certified staff or some academic tutors. But I think your point is a good one, that there might be some ways to supplement and support the work of the classroom teacher.
So I know there's a TA program in the high school
Yep.
with like high school students helping high school
Mhm.
teachers. So we might want to look into that and see if there's any interest in having some high school students at middle schools.
Great idea.
Or that could work for, thank you for bringing that up, the upper, the 8th graders to the lower grades
Yeah.
at the middle school also, because the high school model's a peer model. So they could, I don't know that logistically, I love your idea. I just don't know logistically if we could have the high school students traveling.
Yeah.
I don't know, but we certainly could talk about having other middle school students participate that are older and have been through that, the math curriculum already. Thank you.
I love that idea too, Breggy, and I'd also be interested in maybe exploring having the National Honor Society kids tutoring, or being available to tutor. I'm not really sure, as far as numbers go, how that program works now with the high school, if those kids are overtaxed with the tutoring, or if they have ample time, but that's another kind of creative solution to that, because I am concerned, I know they're projections, but I am concerned about those math numbers. And then maybe getting back to, I think, earlier in October or November, Marty, when you had talked about that PD day where we had students come in and share, and I had mentioned at that time, I'd love to see that duplicated on the math side, so that we could maybe get response from the 9th grade math teachers as far as how well do they feel our 7th and 8th graders are prepared when they get to the high school, and then having those current 9th graders share with the math teachers as well, so we have some back and forth and some good feedback and some good data for there. And then, can I jump to another comment? Because I want to go back to special ed that Stephanie had brought up, because I do feel like 2 years in a row we've, this reduction number is a good number to see, and I don't want to put Jean on the spot, but the out-of-district tuition is such a fluctuating number, and I know there's times when that's unavoidable, and I think that our main goal is to educate as many students as we can and keep them in district. So I'm curious, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you had any feedback at all for the committee as far as when we talk about additions, I think it was 180K in special ed, it's not that particular slide, but what you feel as far as like programming that would work in the K through the younger grade setting, that different things that maybe we aren't using or things that you'd like to see us using, so that we can keep those special ed kids in-house and keep them in district, and maybe kind of help with those out-of-district costs. I realize we're never going to not have out-of-district costs, like that's, unavoidable in some cases, but what type of programming or things that you could maybe suggest that we aren't utilizing, or that you wish we could fund, or?
Jean, can you come?
Oh,
Thank you. That's okay. Thank you.
Or you could bring the mic back there.
No, that's all right. So the wish list is kind of short, honestly, because we have a lot of in-district programming already at our elementary. So it's kind of expanding that. So currently our autism program is only at one elementary school. As that's getting bigger, we need to expand that to another elementary school, which would be meaning more students get to stay in their home school instead of being transported across town. We obviously have to expand our autism program to the middle school because we don't have one right now. But other than that, our language learning disabilities program, we have elementary and middle. The PALS program, the social emotional, is at elementary and middle, and then our Longmeadow Learning Center is also at center and the middle school. So we do have a lot of programming, it's just expanding it and supporting it as the programs get bigger, making sure that the teachers can meet the needs of all the students in the programming. And as far as the out-of-district number, that is a huge number this year for a reduction, and many of those students had been outplaced for years and have aged out. And that doesn't, it just happened to be a large cohort. It also is a reflection of students who maybe were in a private special ed school and moved to a collaborative program, so the cost has decreased. And we had a few students who were residentially placed who chose to take their diploma. They were holding, it was being held, which you can do, and they felt they were ready to move on. So those things just don't happen that often. It all kind of came together this year. I do track aging out dates, so I know, I do keep track of, how many students next year that might age out. It is nothing like what we've seen last year and this year. So that bubble group of students have moved on to adult services at this point.
Would you say, like, based on programming that we're putting in place with this budget and that we currently have in place, would you say that will help us avoid the big swings, maybe? I think that's something we talk about, is like, we, just want to make sure that we do something that's sustainable.
So honestly, it's really unpredictable. I think the better equipped we are to have, supportive programs in as many elementary schools, especially with students for autism. That's the area of disability that's growing at the fastest rate. We happen to get a lot of move-ins with students with autism, but we have no control over that. So when I think back to September, or actually the end of August, we had 4 significantly needy students that moved in from out of state, which it's different if they move in from in-state. If they had been outplaced, you have some benefits there as a district, but they were all from out of state. And in the past, I don't know that we would have been able to maintain them here, but because we happened to get 4 students in a 3-week period in August, we added that teacher, we expanded the program immediately, and we've had consultants coming in to support the staff at Wolf Swamp to meet the needs of these students. And I think so far it's been successful, so we would hope to expand that. But you just never know who's, the move-ins have been, I think, fairly high. And the students are pretty needy. So I take that as they must think we do a good job if they're coming. But, again, that's not something I can predict, and when they come, we figure it out.
Jess? Jean, thank you, that information's extremely helpful. And Beth, thank you for asking Jean those questions. Is there any interconnection more specifically to the additions that are proposed under potential additional investments to special ed in terms of offsetting costs in the long run, cost savings in the long run?
Do you mean on this list here?
No, on the list that says potential additional investments, third bullet point says additional special ed investments, and we spoke about it last week. Adding to each elementary school.
Right. So ideally, and this goes back to
I'm sorry, 2 to each element.
Each element, one more, because they're already adding 1 to each.
Right, so it would have been a net of 2 if we went to the additional.
So I know it's getting a little complicated, but sort of how does that dovetail into this conversation with regard?
So I think it goes back to what Stephanie was saying about co-teaching. So in order to do co-teaching, you really need a special education teacher at each grade level. And because we have 3 elementary schools, and some of them only have, 3 classes, so if you have 3 classrooms at 3rd grade and you have 1 special ed teacher, that's a pretty small caseload unless you're co-teaching. So I think adding this 1 special ed teacher this year gets our caseload down, and the goal is to start pushing services into classrooms, bringing services to kids, supporting teachers in the classroom. And that's the first step to build that foundation before you jump into co-teaching. So in order for co-teaching to be successful, there's a lot of partnerships that have to be built. You can't, it's just not something that I feel that you can just assign 2 people to do. So this is how you start to develop those relationships between your special ed teachers and general ed. which we have great relationships to begin with, but once they start working in the same room and they're working with students, those kind of naturally, you'll have teachers that will start asking, which we've had. We have, some co-teaching going at the middle school. We have a lot at LHS. So to me, that initial investment next year of the 3 teachers is the next natural step. And then if we are fortunate enough to be able to continue to move in that direction by having someone at each grade level, you're able to support students in class. It does not eliminate the need for pull-out. If students need pull-out specialized instruction, they're going to get that. So it wouldn't be a one-size-fits-all, but I think we have the capacity to do more inclusive services.
So just to follow up, Jean, with regard to the additional 3, can we say, or can we hope that might help to offset, accumulating additional costs in the special ed department projecting forward?
I
by
think so.
keeping students in-house, by keeping students mainstreamed in classrooms. Because when I see that kind of addition to special ed, that's what I'm thinking about. How, as you've been talking about, the committee's been talking about, how can we do and Superintendent O'Shea, our very best to keep kids in the classrooms.
Right.
And then also a win-win being a cost savings for the school department and the town in the long run.
Mhm.
That's what I'm thinking. And I'm wanting to have that really laid out for us while we're considering that extra 3.
Right.
With the additional 3.
And you're talking about what's up on the board.
Yes,
there.
thank you.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for putting that
Yeah.
slide up.
What we have not proposed for tonight, but if it was, the dream budget and we could have everything, that would be it. I think what
Not
we have.
dream, ideal.
Ideal. So I think what's in there is a really good start. I mean, I think it's a generous start to get us on the track and keep us on the path to moving in the right direction, And the out-of-district placements, again, there are students who will need that, and, we follow the process of going through least restrictive, and it's nice to be able to keep kids in class and then have programming in their neighborhood school, and then if they need to go to a district program, and then we look at outplacing, later. So by following that process, there's a timeline. So hopefully you're in a situation to be able to budget.
Yeah, right. That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jean, for coming up
Thank
and
you
really
for coming.
delving into that question, because I think for us and for parents, when you just see out of district and then the number, it's nice to have the backstory and for you to explain that large cohort group and all of that other information is really helpful to us.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from anybody? Russ?
So, if we were going to try and cut another 100,000, what would it be?
I mean, that's the, well, let me.
What do you think, Russ?
Let me add one more thing to
Throw
that,
back
actually.
to you.
Answer that question with a question.
So we're about 70% of the budget? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think when we looked at the presentation, they did it like 72%.
Okay, so we end the year usually with a few $100,000 left. And we've paid for curriculum, usually that should actually be in our budget, which we put on the list of things we wanted to do, but we just can't figure out a way to do it because of the tight budgets. But on the town side, so they have the other 30%, but they're ending the year, at least the last couple of years, with about $1 million in free cash. So obviously that would typically mean we have a much tighter budget than the town does.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to do things like this, I just want to be clear that on the town side, they need to do the same thing.
Right.
Because if we're getting to 2.3 because we're being tight, I really expect them to do the same. So I don't mind looking at that personally as one member, if it was something that we could potentially live without, if it's not a critical need, basically. But I would want the same. I would really want the town striving for, is it 2.3 or is it something less than that? If there's a way to cut down on free cash at the end of every year, because I know we buy equipment and everything else with it, but at the end of the day, I'd love to do that too on this side. It'd be great if we could do curriculum for everything we need, which is quite a bit, as Sue would tell us. But we haven't been doing that. We've basically been ending the year with a reasonable amount of money left. I do think we need to consider this, but I want it on both sides of the fence.
So to not give you an answer, I would say that we'd probably want to go back to the admin team to really come up with what that 100,000 would look like in terms of proposed reductions. I think in light of the information that the governor's budget, what it's proposing, I don't know that I could sit here and say to you that we'd want to come forward with any more proposed reductions until we know what that final number ends up being.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to have to put things on the
Bless you.
table
Thank you.
publicly until we know that the numbers don't work out in terms of balanced budget. I think what we put forward is, I think the superintendent, in my estimation, is reasonable. It's something that we can sustain. It's very close to what the budget number that was talked about back in the fall. So I know a week ago we thought we needed to have a different conversation, but the governor hadn't released his information yet. So at this point, I would propose holding off on any more conversation until we get more information about the state's Chapter 70 number.
Because you think we might be able to get to 2.3 or thereabouts
I
without
think,
changing
yeah,
anything?
I do. I think that large of an increase, and for those of you that haven't seen it, what the governor proposed for Chapter 70 and for local aid is about 300,000 above the assumption that was built into the budget projection that was shared back in October. So, I mean, back then there was a deficit with that calculation coming in much higher than anticipated. Again, it could be similar to our special ed reduction. It could be a one-time thing that we can't depend on because Long Meadow hasn't seen that kind of increase in a number of years. So I wouldn't say we can bank on it, but before we move forward, any more talk of any potential cuts, I think we want to see what that final number looks like.
Yeah, and I'm in favor of the town's idea to try to get below 2.5, as you can tell. But also the OPEB capital. I mean, I think they're doing the right thing on their side, and I think we're trying to do the right thing on our side. It's just, we need to do that every year, as you said earlier. This is really going to have to be a concerted effort for a while. Probably permanently, actually. So.
Anyone else? Great, thank you so much. This was, again, a great presentation. I personally am really excited with the budget that you brought forward, the recommendation. I think it's got, it fits in just right.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are moving on to ongoing business. We have no administrative reports or subcommittee reports. And next on the agenda is the 3-year district improvement plan, which was tabled at our last meeting. Marty, do you want to?
Yeah, I think we've sort of set the stage a number of times, and so I don't want to, I'm certainly happy to do that again. I don't want to belabor it, but I think it would hopefully is a reflection of the collaborative efforts that have gone on between our administrative team and school committee, and it's a reflection of the goals that we've set around this table. And it's also a reflection of, I think, a lot of hard, long conversations with the administrative team. It even goes back to, our admin retreats in the summer of 17 and the summer of 16, where we really were diving into DESE standards for effective school districts. We dove into a lot of survey data that we collected last year, and so I think there's a lot of inputs into this, and I hope it's something that will guide our decision-making going forward. I think sometimes we often talk about, what are we going to do next year, with our professional development time. And those decisions are really impossible to make unless you have clearly defined goals. So the more that we're able to define our goals, I think we're in a better position to figure out what we want to do with our professional development time. We're in a better position to bring forward budget recommendations that reflect the discussions that we've had together here, that reflect the input from the community. So I think, frankly, when you have defined goals, it really helps with the planning going forward. And so It's a dense document with many, indicators of success or statements of desired results. But the three broad goals relate to social emotional learning, differentiation, and curriculum alignment. And so seek your input and hopefully approval. So, yeah.
Okay, so we have a recommended motion on the agenda. I'll entertain if anyone's.
I move on the recommendation of the superintendent that the school committee approve the 3-year district improvement plan as presented and dated January 24th, 2018.
Is there a second?
It should be.
Second.
I'm sorry, there was a new document in your packet. So it's dated
Updated.
the 30th, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Dated January 30th. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion. Questions or comments? Beth?
I just wanted to comment on the addition of, under intermediate objective number 2. I am especially happy about point C, the develop and implement mechanisms for student athletes and their parents to provide feedback to coaches and LPS administration on student athletic experiences. I'm happy that that was included and as a nice addition to our district improvement plan.
Thank you. Agreed.
Agree.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? We can move to a vote.
Can I ask a quick question with regard to number 5? I just wanted to be clear on the culturally responsive practices at school and classroom level. It says teachers from every school will engage in professional development on culturally responsible teaching practices that effectively support inclusions and engenders competence and meaning for all students. Could you just give us a little bit of the meat behind that
Sure, yeah.
particular item?
Yeah, it's something that we've talked about administratively, is that we're kind of making sure that we have the capacity to educate students with, diverse backgrounds, whether it relate to their ethnicity, their race, their socioeconomic status. We want to be sure that we are meeting learners where they are. So, we haven't frankly fully defined that, and this is part of, this is a 3-year plan. I know that Amy Bastian at Blueberry, you've recently took part with your school council, I think, in some training that kind of relates to this district improvement goal. So it's something that we want to do more of. And we have, it's a challenge. There's a lot of, professional development time is valuable and maybe more limited than we would like, but, we'll do our best to try and ensure that we can kind of increase our capacity in that area.
Yeah, I was wondering if there were specific programs that we've even started to identify, because, definitely coming from the Blueberry Hill perspective and a lot of conversations we've had there around issues of being culturally responsive, and terms of art like inclusion, and even just the language, getting everybody on the same page with the language. So I don't want to put Ms. Boston on the spot, but
You can.
can I? That would be great, because I would be so interested to hear if you've been talking about specific programs for educators around this issue.
So right now, and I thank Marty for pointing out it's a 3-year plan. So for, being new, it's getting an understanding of where students are at, where families are at, how they're feeling. So the school council has asked if we could sort of engage in this dialogue together, and then could we help the district grow in this area too. I think there has been a lot of good work in this area that has already been done that I absolutely can't speak to. But I know that the training that Marty just talked about, it was called Undoing Racism.
Okay.
And so this is just one way that our school council thought maybe we could start to have conversations about not just racism, but, the messages that we're giving our kids through our curriculum, through our the books that we offer in the library, activities that we are sponsoring for families, those kinds of things. So we're still kind of exploring that
all those topics together. So I'm not at all comfortable saying like this program will help guide our conversation. So right now we're having I'm having conversations with staff, even sharing that with the other principals as well. So or the feedback that I'm getting from my staff and parents through the school council. So this is something that was even talked about during the interview process for for selecting the next Blueberry principal.
Right.
So
Right,
it's
exactly.
something that I and have been very supported through through Marty, through the rest of the principals on this journey. So the conversations have been started. I think there's just a need for just making sure that we're doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, which we do all the time. But that's kind of
Yeah.
where we're at. So it's in the infancy stage.
Yes, exactly. And I'm glad to
yeah.
see that it's up for discussion because I think, particularly in a town like Longmeadow, we have a ways to go with regard to this topic, cultural sensitivity, education, training across the board in our community. So there are a lot of things, that happen on the playground, that happen in the hallways, not Blueberry at all, but, in our town. And I think that this is
Well, it might though.
incredibly.
We're not immune to that, and so
No, I meant not just at Blueberry,
Right. Oh, just
everywhere.
at- yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a quiet sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's something that's sort of happens sometimes quietly, and sometimes children and families suffer sort of on their own. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm happy to see it brought out on the table and into the spotlight, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about what we can do as a community.
and coupling it with our commitment to social emotional learning, and
Yeah.
coupling it with our ability to differentiate for all learners. And I think there's just so many ways in this plan, our district improvement plan, where it just fits and makes sense and feels organic and feels comfortable.
Yeah.
It's not a separate entity. It's very much a part of everything that is threaded throughout this plan. So.
Thank you.
And so I think we did something in November. We had.
Yeah, we've actually trained a couple of groups of folks in culturally responsive classrooms. I think the PE teachers went through it, and speech pathologists. So we've had a couple of trainings already with a woman named Ariel Nelson, who's done some of our ELL training as well. She's all about it, so we kind of wanted to give her a trial on some smaller groups. They have rave reviews, so she's talking about putting a plan together for next year for her to come on a more regular basis to address, a wider group of folks on that, because I think, we're not aware of what we're not aware of.
Right.
As far as culturally responsive classroom is concerned, no one's out there doing things on purpose, but I think it's the things that we're not doing and not recognizing that we need to have our attentions called to that. So we got really good feedback from that, and I think I talked to Jean and I think are going to push forward with some of that in some way next year.
Have we had any change overall in the percentage, different groups of students in our school? Has it gone up over the years? or-
Yeah.
It has?
Yeah.
Dramatically, or?
I wouldn't say so dramatically, I guess, but it's certainly increased, our diversity.
Because the
You're talking-
state's expectation.
Racial
really-
demographics?
Yeah.
Has it broadened?
Yeah, we had a percentage increase in minority students or other students in protected categories. And so
Okay.
the state's expectation, and really what should be our expectation too, is when that happens, you should be, one, noticing it, and two, doing things like training and making sure students and staff know, what their expectations are and that type of thing. So it's actually something that, if there was ever an issue, the state looks at that very carefully to see if there was a trend, you should have noticed it. That's the expectation. So-
I see, yeah.
But that's good. That seems like we have been noticing it and dealing with it.
I just wanted to say, I do really like this. I'm glad you brought it kind of forward into our attention a little bit more, and to hear that we're going to look at things through a different lens, so it does cut across everything from curriculum and what's in our social studies books and science and who's highlighted. Is it men? Is it, it really is looking at everything across the board through a different lens. And what books, I'd love to hear that, what books are we offering and how are we teaching all different things? And it really is not just within the classroom, but it is looking across the board at everything through a different lens. And I think so much of that has been brought to our attention recently. And I think it's great that we're taking steps to do that.
motion on the table, and I believe a second. Are there any other questions or comments on the motion to approve the district improvement plan, the 3-year district improvement plan dated January 30th, 2018? Okay, take a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Can I just say thank you?
Yes,
Appreciate
for
the
sure.
support and the feedback,
Thank
and
you.
I know the team appreciates it. It's totally a we effort involving this committee and involving the administrative team. So our goal now would be to make this a living, breathing document and push it out there and have it front and center. It needs to be on our bulletin boards. It needs constant, regular attention, and so thank you. Appreciate that feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Okay.
All right. Thank you
So,
all.
thank you, and we have no other new business. Do have an executive session planned for the meeting. There is a recommended motion on our agenda. I can entertain.
I move that the school committee meet in executive session pursuant to MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, purpose to conduct a strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, specifically the superintendent, and purpose number 2, to conduct a strategy session in preparation with collective bargaining with Unit A, and purpose not to reconvene into open session. And this motion requires a roll call vote.
Okay, and we need a second.
Second.
Thank you, and roll call vote. All those in favor?
Karen Moore and I.
Jess Hutchins, aye.
Melanie Rothstein, aye.
Michelle Grodzki, aye.
Krista Dupre, aye.
Stephanie Jasmine, I.
Beth Baron, aye.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we are all set. Have a good evening.